By 2255 BCE, the Akkadian Empire was economically stable and militarily strong. The new king Naram-Sin inherited what was the greatest military of its time and more resources than any of his predecessors. However, he also inherited the fate of almost every newly crowned Akkadian ruler, the political instability caused by the subjects who sought every opportunity to break away from the authority of Akkad. In the case of Naram-Sin, this challenge would be bigger than ever before in the past. Provinces and vassal states from all over the empire rose up in what was described as the Great Revolt. The rebellion was so massive that Naram-Sin, in his inscriptions, stated that all 4 quarters of the world had revolted against him. In Sumer, the revolt was centered around the city of Kish, which was traditionally highly respected by the Akkadian rulers. Even Naram-Sin himself was taken by surprise, noting in his records the following: Kish, Kuta, Tiwa, Urumu, Kazalu, Giritab, Apiak, Ibrat, Dalbat, Uruk, and Sipar together revolted against me. At the time when Sargon, my forefather, defeated Uruk, he established freedom to the people of Kish, shaved off their hairstyles that identified them as slaves, and broke their fetters. O Ishtar, Ilaba, Shulat and Hanish, Shamash and Umshum, Kish was not an enemy, it was an ally to me. Yet between Tiwa and Urumu, at Ugar-Sin, between the temples, Esabad and Gula, Kish assembled. Ifur Kish, a man of Kish, the son of Sumerat Ishtar, the lamentation princess, they installed as king. Naram-Sin then proceeds to mention various kings that were a part of the alliance, such as those of Simurum, Namar, Apishal, Mari, Marhasi, Mardaman, Magan, Uruk, Uma, and Nippur. This clearly indicates that when it comes to Sumer, the rebels were supported by the foreign powers as well, like Simurum, Magan, and Marhasi. In Upper Mesopotamia, the influential city of Mari used the opportunity to challenge the new king themselves, in coordination with Subartu, as well as their allies in Ibla and Armanu. It seems that initially, Naram-Sin struggled to put down the revolt, as he was faced with difficulties of fighting a war on 2 fronts. Heavy casualties were inflicted on the Akkadian forces, and it became unclear whether Naram-Sin had the capacity to eventually emerge victorious. However, the new king did manage to prove his worth on the battlefield, grinding down to eventually prevail against the Sumerian alliance. After several hard-fought battles over the years, Naram-Sin defeated and took over Kish before proceeding to deal with the rest of the coalition. The king apparently spent another year campaigning against Uruk, where he eventually achieved decisive victory and finally brought Sumer back under his control. The revolt was far from over, however, as Simurum together with their allies were still at war with Akkad. Moreover, the revolt was still raging in Upper Mesopotamia, with the anti-Akkadian coalition building up, although it is unknown to which degree, or if at all, they coordinated their actions with the lower lands. Either way, the following year, or rather 2 years, Naram-Sin spent campaigning against Simurum, which he ultimately met in Kirasanive for the decisive battle. Proving his military prowess once more, the king of the 4 quarters soundly defeated the Simurum force, capturing their ruler Baba, but also his ally Dubul, the Ansi of Arame. With Sumer finally secured, Naram-Sin moved northwest into Upper Mesopotamia. There, he crushed the revolt in Mari and reincorporated it into his kingdom. His next target were the real enablers of the uprising in the region, the wealthy city of Ibla. The alliance of Ibla and Armanum was seemingly backed by other allies, such as those of the Taurus and Amanus mountains. However, this did not help Ibla, which, just like many cities before them, proved to be no match for Naram-Sin and fell to the Akkadian army. Whereas for all time since the creation of mankind, no king whosoever had destroyed Armanum and Ibla, the god Nergal, by means of his weapons opened the way for Naram-Sin, the mighty, and gave him Armanum and Ibla. Further, he gave him the Amanus, the Cedar Mountain and the Upper Sea, by means of the weapons of the god Dagan, who magnifies his kingship. Naram-Sin the mighty conquered Armanum and Ibla. It appears that Naram-Sin topped off his campaign with an incursion into Sicilia, where he defeated the tribes from the mountains of Taurus and Amanus, as depicted on the Nasirya stele, where the booty taken by the Akkadian soldiers is reminiscent of the well-known Anatolian vessels, otherwise unknown in Mesopotamia. A partially recovered inscription of one of Naram-Sin's regnal year names reads as follows: "The year in which Naram-Sin was victorious, and he himself cut down cedar timber in the land of Amanus." After this victory, Naram-Sin solidified himself as the undisputed ruler of Mesopotamia. His empire was even bigger than when he ascended to the throne. It is believed that around this time, Naram-Sin decided to make a bold and unprecedented move. The Akkadian king, the king of the four quarters of the world, proclaimed himself the god of Akkad. He placed himself shoulder to shoulder with the very deities such as Enlil, Ishtar, and Enki, and assumed patronage over the capital city of the empire. Although apparently unopposed at the moment, would not be something that was positively looked upon in the future. But for the time being, the god king was born. Naram-Sin proceeded to rebuild and enrich various religious centers such as Nippur, Akkad, Zabala, and others, erecting numerous statues to the Mesopotamian deities, now with himself included. He also strengthened the imperial infrastructure in Upper Mesopotamia, establishing regional administrative centers at Nagar and Nineveh. To the south, Naram-Sin moved to tighten his control over Elam, a province that surprisingly did not take part in the Great Revolt. Hita, the governor of Susa, instead chose to either stay neutral or remain completely loyal to Akkad. This was further confirmed in a treaty which Hita subsequently signed with his Akkadian overlord, stating, "The enemy of Naram-Sin is my enemy. The friend of Naram-Sin is my friend." Furthermore, Hita provided the Elamite troops to Naram-Sin and went on to marry his daughter to the king. Lastly, Hita agreed to erect statues of Naram-Sin in the sanctuaries of Susa, built temples in his name, and had the Akkadian language replace Elamite in the official documents. From this marriage, Naram-Sin had numerous children. His 4 sons were Shar-Kali-Shari, Nabi-Ulmash, Ukin-Ulmash, and Sharati-Gubishin. He also had many daughters, who usually occupied the highest religious positions throughout the empire. One of his daughters in particular, Tutanabshum, was the high priestess of Enlil at Nippur, the most important religious position of all. Eventually, Tutanabshum was also deified, and thus became the only female ever to be made a goddess. Although the Akkadian Empire now seemed to be stronger than ever before, Naram-Sin was not done with his conquests. The kingdom of Magan to the south had helped the Great Revolt at the beginning of his reign, and Naram-Sin was not about to let that go unpunished. The Akkadian expedition thus went all the way to Magan, where King Manium decided to make a stand. Although Manium possibly gave a good account of himself, he was inevitably defeated, and Kingdom of Magan became a vassal state of the Akkadians. After decades of Naram-Sin's rule, the Akkadian Empire was at its greatest territorial extent. This was further solidified with an expedition against the mountainous lands to the north. According to Naram-Sin, the rulers of the Lulubi tribes of the Zagros Mountains, Sidur and Sutuni, made war against the god king. The motive for this war was unknown, although judging by the appearance of new threats on the northern borders during Naram-Sin's later reign, as well as during the reigns of his successors, it is plausible that after decades of constant warfare, the Akkadian Empire possibly did not have the resources and strength like they did in the past. This, however, was certainly not apparent when Naram-Sin marched to meet his northern adversaries. In the ensuing battle, the Akkadians scored a decisive victory, shattering the Lulubi alliance. This seemed to be a very important victory for the god king, so much that he erected a magnificent victory stele to celebrate his triumph. On the stele, Naram-Sin was depicted as a deity wearing a horned helmet, which was in the Akkadian tradition reserved only for the gods. Although Naram-Sin's godlike status was seemingly never questioned during his reign, it was very negatively looked upon in the generations following his time. A later Mesopotamian myth, called the Curse of Akkad, blames none other than Naram-Sin for bringing the curse of the gods upon his empire, which would eventually fall down to the Gutians. Although Naram-Sin's kingdom would not fall over the course of his reign, the emerging Gutian threat would grow even more dangerous and would be left to Naram-Sin's successors to bear the consequences. Naram-Sin passed away in 2218 BCE, being succeeded by his son, Shar-Kalishari. We're introducing this Super Thanks. The Super Thanks button allows you, the viewers, to show an extra gratitude to the channel and get your comments highlighted and noticed not only by myself, but other viewers as well. Underneath the video, you will see a heart with a $sign in it. You can enter any amount that you find suitable. Hopefully you enjoy the content. Special thanks to History with Sai, Nico, Chris Ernst, Panayotis Yiannopoulos, Fred Leckie, Tim Lane, ABC Sheikh, Derek Wildstar, Padre91, Argyris Margaritis, Joel Sally Briggs, Labelle Olmier, Mercy Tain, Luis Aldames, Vineyard Illumination, and Estate Care for their continuous support. This was WanaxTV, and we'll see you again soon.